Thank you for inviting me today. This is a very important time in the transformation of systems as we and others are working on this. I know you are. I want to say a little bit at the beginning about what we do, how we do it, our modus operandi, so to speak, and who we are. So what we do, we focus on three things in all of our projects. I'm going to say systemness, large chunks of the system, bigger than a district. Excuse me, there's some dust up here, so I might need some water at some point soon. Okay, I'm allergic to Iowa, but don't take it personally. So we work on large chunks of the system, always more than one district, and ideally as much as the state or the province, or in some cases the country. So big. But it's also grounded, because the second thing we do is we zero in on pedagogy. What is the teaching and learning that's going to be most powerful for all students and all teachers engaged? So very great specificity, I'm going to say, not prescription, but precision. And the third thing we always do is we trace the causal pathways to measurable student learning outcomes, including new outcomes that I'll tell you about that are more fundamental for global competencies, but also including literacy, numeracy, high school graduation. So it's pretty ambitious, but also grounded. The modus operandi is something like this. As I said, we team up with groups in a system. We do the work over a period of 2 or 3 years. And then after we do it, I write a book, not before, always after. And then we do it better the next time. And then I write a better book, hopefully. And we keep doing this. This means that it's practice chasing theory. In fact, a guideline that we abide by, and we know to be true from our work, is that 80% of the best ideas come from leading practitioners, not from research. 80% of our best ideas are coming from leading practitioners. We will always go to the source of doing before we go to the research. We will go to the research as a second stage, but it's grounded in practice that you have to really be there, because that's the only way to understand it. And so that's important to be able to do, is to make sure that you keep doing it better and better and that's where the Coherence book that I'll talk about today, along with our new work, comes from. It comes from about 200 workshops, I'm going to say, in California, in Ontario, really all around the world, that where we began to, with school systems, identify what worked and how do we get to it and how to have more impact. So this kind of really grounded applied work has been the second one. And the who we are, there's probably about 10 or 12 of us, mostly based in Toronto, but we do a lot of traveling. And so, and they've all doers. In my own career, which is about 40 years, the first 20 years I was an academic, and the last 20 years I'm a practitioner. This is applied work. And the other people we have, Joanne Quinn, my co-author of Coherence. She's been a teacher, principal, consultant, superintendent, worked at the government level. Mary Jean Gallagher, I won't go down the long list, but this is very important. Mary Jean Gallagher, I'm advisor to the Premier and the Minister in Ontario. I have been for about 15 years to our system. And what we do is we use a lot of practitioners to lead change from the government to the field. So Mary Jean was a superintendent in Windsor, near Detroit, just across the river. We hired her to head the Literacy Numeracy Secretariat in the government, which was a State Department unit that worked with the system. Then after her 6.5 years in that job, about 1.5 years ago, she finished that, and I hired her in the system work that we do in California and other places. So this is really growing in importance. It's growing in how grounded it is. You see the title of, I want to focus on the right drivers question. We'll get to that immediately. These resources are available easily on my website. Bottom left-hand corner, you can't see so well, michaelfullan.ca. All one word, michaelfullan.ca. And in it, you can download this under the resources, this PDF. You can also access articles. We have a YouTube channel with a lot of usually 5-minute clips coming from, mostly from the field, sometimes from me, and it really is meant to be a usable resource. We have, in addition, the two kinds of work we do that are overlapping now. One is system change. System change. Ontario, we certainly have cut our teeth there, but actually, and I mean this in a friendly way, we cut our teeth by using the research in the US that the US was not implementing, but was finding. Stuff about collaboration, about construction, about how things work effectively. So we're able to do that, but all the time we're learning from other places in this development. And then the system change has recently given away a little bit to what we call the new pedagogies for deep learning. This is really qualitatively different in terms of the content of the solution. And I wanted to do both of those things, coherence, system change on the one hand, and deep learning on the other. So let's take a look at how we frame this. I did a paper in 2011. It was called Choosing the Wrong Drivers for Whole System Reform. And this is the frame of it. You can download this from, you can probably go to Google and say Choosing the Wrong Drivers and you'll get this paper, but it's certainly on my website. And on the right-hand side, what is a driver? A driver is a policy, and a wrong driver is a policy that doesn't work. And you can say, well, why do politicians use wrong drivers then? Well, I don't think it's very mysterious. I guess I could say because they're politicians, because they can legislate it, because they're in a hurry, because the wrong drivers can be made to appeal superficially to the public, but they don't work. And so in that paper, and it doesn't mean we don't do the right-hand side, you'll see that we do, it's just that we don't put them in the driver's seat. So wrong-headed accountability in Iowa, the state of Iowa, I think, has resisted a lot of the wrong-headed accountability we saw at the federal level and at many of the states and certainly in England. So I'll tell you what right-headed accountability is, but accountability that's punitive, that ends up demotivating people, obviously doesn't work, but it seems like it should work, so people keep trying to do it. The second one on the right-hand side is more subtle. I'm going to call it the individualistic fallacy. And it is based on the assumption that if only we had better teachers, if only we had better leaders, school principals, better superintendents, et cetera. The emphasis is on individuals, what we call, and I'll come back to this, human capital. And obviously that makes a difference, but if you don't change the culture, you can add individuals till the cows come home. And the system will eat up the individuals. So we find individualistic strategies by themselves to be wanting, yet the ones that people most often go to. I'll show you how to recalibrate that. And the third one, technology. Technology, we are certainly integrating it in our work now in a very powerful way, but mostly when it started on a big scale, say 10 years ago, the main strategy seemed to be to buy it, B-U-I. You want to be modern, let's have more technology, we better have it. So that by itself, we now have, I think, a better perspective. Technology is not the driver, pedagogy is the driver. Technology is the accelerator. And then ad hoc strategies clearly don't work. They're ad hoc. There's too many of them. Some people call it initiativitis. They're disconnected. So in the paper then, I went to talk about the right drivers, and I'm going to recalibrate them again into a better strategy in a moment, but just to lay the groundwork, capacity building. What is that? It is about competencies, and I can put the competencies into two bins. One bin is about pedagogy. What are the skills and the nature of the changes that need to be used to be effective in learning? And the other bin I'll put in change leadership. Not so straightforward, but we have good insights about it. Change leadership is not, as we will see, being right. That only is part of it. It's how do you be right with the group that you're working with. And that subtly will come out. Collaborative work, some really good, important things. Now recently, making a distinction between collaboration itself, which is not necessarily automatically good. You can collaborate to do nothing. You can collaborate to do the wrong thing. So what is good collaboration? Pedagogy, late to the game in some ways, only in the last 7 or 8 years, but stronger and stronger. And this odd word, systemness. Systemness, not a real word, probably, but it connotes a real concept for us. It means that when people are working in the field, that they are focusing on their own work, but they're also aware they're part of a bigger entity, whether it's the school district, or the state, and that they realize that they need to contribute to the bigger entity and learn from it. We have been able to sort that out, I think. In this work today, I'm very happy to be talking with you and the School Boards Association, because about 6 months ago, I started to work on the question of governance. We did the coherence solution, so to speak, and I'll show it to you in a moment. And then one of my colleagues in California, senior colleague Davis Campbell, he had been executive director of the California School Boards Association from 1988 to 2003. And he really latched onto the coherence framework, and he said, there's a connection between governance and coherence making, and I want to make that more explicit because hardly anybody is examining that. So I can't say that we've got the answers yet, but we're hot on the trail. And there is a very strong connection. And I'll show you a little bit of it, we'll be able to talk about it in the breakout session, is that every school district we know that's successful, and there are many in California because we work so much there, but Whittier, Long Beach, Garden Grove, all of them, they have coherence between the school board and the senior administration and the work of the system, every one of them. And how do you get that? What is coherence in that? When you put it in the level of governance, I'll introduce it to you in this session. We'll pursue it in the breakout session. So if we look at, I just want to give you a sense of why we look at measurable outcomes. I'm going to show you grade 6 writing from Ontario, just because we have the explicit data. When we started in 2003, this was, the previous 5 years, 6 years was stagnant. And we've been doing this strategy better and better since 2004, let's say. And this is the the province of Ontario, 4,000 elementary schools, 2 million students approximately. And it's the whole system. And the question is, what is the percentage of students who do well on the state test? And the state tests actually have quite a high standard. That's why the startup is low. It's not just writing, it's writing with accomplishment. And so if we look at the first graph, you'll see we started in the stagnant period 54%, and then a pretty steady development. And I'm going to say it this way, this is not a fluke. This is deliberately building the capacity along the right drivers of the teachers and students and schools and school districts in the system. We are very much committed to equity, comparing subgroups and making sure we do something about it. So if we look at subgroups, let's take a look at girls and boys. Girls do better than boys in writing, but we've been closing the gap. The question always is not just overall what is happening, but what are the subgroups doing, and what will it take specifically for a given subgroup to do better, to move up, raise the bar, close the gap, as we say. And then this one is special education. You'll see when we weren't paying attention, 12, 11, 14, it was sitting there and going nowhere. And then we started to say, what is it that we can do in special education and inclusion that will make a difference? Technology certainly helped there, assistive technology, and we began to see the building up of that. So that's been very strong. And then this one is really, I think, remarkable in some ways. These are English second language. You probably know that Ontario, Toronto gets a lot of immigrants, diverse, and English, they don't speak English when they arrive. A lot of them are in poverty. And I can say now with confidence, pretty much after 5 years, we can catch up immigrants to the average of the system because we specifically apply the strategies to the subgroups, to the 4,000 schools, to the sharing of what works and what doesn't work. And you see that pretty strong graduation upwards. So First Nations one harder to interpret because we have federal and provincial levels, so I won't go there. So my point about this is when we did this work and did the wrong drivers paper, people said to us, we understand that the wrong drivers are indeed wrong, And we sort of get a glimpse of the right drivers, but can you more systematically focus on the positive? What are the right drivers? What do they look like? And this is our result. You'll see they correspond, not literally, but almost to the right drivers on the initial paper. But we did this to be more systematic. And there's a few, I guess I'm going to say, sticky words I like to use. A sticky phrase is something that's got an insight and it stays with you. So the sticky phrase here, although it doesn't sound like it, is simplexity. Simplexity, not a real word, real concept. The smallest number of things that are important on a given issue. So that's the simple part, identify those, 4 in our case. Complexity, the complex part, how do you make them gel together? And this isn't 1, 2, 3, 4, although the first 2 we like to focus on near the beginning. The best way of thinking about the analogy, it's like a pulsating heart. 4 chambers of the heart. A healthy heart is that the blood is flowing through each chamber. In one sense, you could say leadership is like that. It causes the things to flow through and across the 4 chambers here. But it's this kind of high-powered interaction of these 4 things that make the difference. Remember, this is coming from practice. This isn't us sitting in the research lab dreaming it up. It's what we learned from California, from really all systems that were working, districts that were most effective, for example. So let's take a look at these. First of all, the word coherence. This is another insight, because most people had tried to work on what they called alignment. So here are the goals, here's the assessment system, here's the professional learning, all of the pieces that would be logical, you align them, and then you have a system that should work. Well, alignment is only on paper. And the big breakthrough is to realize that coherence, and I'll give you a simple and a slightly tweaked definition of this. Coherence is fully and only subjective. This means if it doesn't exist in your mind, it doesn't exist. So you see how hard it is to get, because we're going to tip it into the group, not just the individual. Coherence, the shared depth of understanding about the nature of the work. Well, when you stop and think about it, those 3 things, shared, depth, understanding, you can't get that from a workshop. You can't get that from a document. You can't get that from some inspiring speech. There's only one way to get it, and this is how I want to ground it, is through the day-to-day interaction of groups of people trying to do something specific together and transparent and learning from it and getting better and better and better at it. In other words, it's a change in the culture. So any change, and then because it's shared, that's got to have a lot of interaction, not the kind of interaction you would get in a few meetings, but the kind of interaction you would get cumulatively over a period of time. This is about reculturing, not restructuring. Some of that can happen, it can help, but it's definitely about reculturing. So if we take governance, this is the new work that we started to do, and we're just at the early stages. I know it fits, but we haven't got all the details of fitting. Probably to go to coherence is the best way. The governance function is often not integrated into the deep work, and therefore cannot necessarily be thought of as a cohesive partner. That's Davis's starting point when he looks at this work. And then when we add coherence to it, you find that coherence, ideally, that we're starting with, yes, you can get it to a certain extent. Even this is hard, teachers and staff and administration. But the board, the school board, is not necessarily that two-way connection. And put it this way, this is what we need. We need the tripartite connection. So it really is about the two-way relationship between the school board trustees on the one hand and the administration and the whole system on the other. We will have a lot more to say about this over the next 10 months. We know the connection is there because we've seen it in the best of the systems, but that's what we need to strive for, and I hope in the breakout session you can help me identify some issues from your point of view. So this is in our stuff that we're working on now, Davis and myself. We're trying to put these 4 things in a practical sense. What is the mindset that would be required? What's the strategic focus around the 4 pieces of coherence? How do you prepare to be an effective board member? And what is the style or the manner that's required for people to work productively? So we'll look at that. Systems thinking, we don't think about this as abstract. I do work with Peter Senge now and then, but systems thinking to us is practical. It's how you think about the connections of pieces that make a difference. If you miss them, things get worse. If you pay attention to them, things get better. So we won't put on our systems hat in an abstract way. I want to move into the specificity of it. So let's go to the coherence framework. The first two I want to do together, in sequence, because you can't focus direction without collaboration. You can, but it won't be very meaningful to those that have to implement it. So you have to think of this as a dynamic two-way street from point one. But what about focus direction? You see we have in that sub-box, and you can read the book that's got this spelled out. Not only do we have the goals of direction, which is essential, but we have to start thinking about the strategy of getting there, the leadership that will be required in quadrant one to make this come alive. And I want to give you just a rhetorical response to this. This goal is about, these questions are in relation to our moral purpose that we call it. Moral purpose is raise the bar and close the gap for all students, that commitment. In those 4 questions, I'm not going to ask you to respond to them, but just think of them this way. Not only, if I were to tap you on the shoulder and say, what is the moral purpose you have in your work as a trustee or a superintendent? You would tell me in 1 or 2 sentences. Then I'd get a little more pushy about it. What actions are you taking? How are you helping others do it? What are you making progress and so forth? So this is setting the tone in a sense. But now let's introduce the change variable. Let's say I were to ask teachers, can all students learn? 95% of them, I think, would say yes. But let's say I go to a school, or more than one school, where all students are not learning. I bet deep down those teachers cannot possibly think that all students can learn, because some of their students day after day are not learning. So how could they believe that? I don't think they would lie about it. It's just that cognitively it just doesn't add up. So here's the question, the change question. If somebody really doesn't believe that their particular students can learn a lot more than they are, what's going to change their mind? This is a change question. What's not going to change their mind are 2 things. One is research evidence. Here's your school. Here are other schools just like yours, same demographics. They're getting success, you're not. It's not very convincing for a reason I'll say in a moment. The second thing that won't work, and this sounds like it should, but it doesn't, is increased moral exhortation. Increased moral exhortation is when you say, we're in this for the good of the kids, only you say it louder and more often. That's exhortation. It's not the reason that those 2 things don't work is the first one says it can be done. The second one says it should be done. Neither of them tell you how to do it. So the teacher is stuck. They're stuck in defensiveness or denial. What's going to change their mind? What's going to change their mind if they have new experiences in relatively non-threatening circumstances, helped by other teachers or other leaders, to have where their students get experiences they didn't get before, then they start to believe that there's something to this, that it's possible to get this movement, and this is what we've proven, I think, time and time again. I want to take the notion of strategy, because it's not so straightforward. We try to not make it very complicated. Usually we have 2 variables at a time that interact, and that's what this one is. Successful change process is a function of shaping and reshaping good ideas on the one hand, as they build capacity and ownership on the other hand. Notice that capacity is not something you have on day one. It's something you build, and that's where it convinces people for change. Let me give you 2 examples of this in practice, practical examples. First one's beautiful. I got from a practitioner. The other one's from a practitioner as well in business. We were working in Australia in one of the systems, and they were trying to change 80 schools, improve literacy and numeracy and high school graduation. And when we were there at the very beginning, as we were kind of just taking a look what was happening, we were in the Canberra Secondary School in Canberra, Australia, and they had introduced a peer coaching and supervision feedback system. They trained 3 of the peers to do that in a quality teacher framework. It's quite a good innovation, let's say. And then when we were there at the beginning, most of the teachers went out of their way. We weren't even studying this part, and said to us, we're not going to do this. We don't want our peers coming into our classroom, observing us and telling us how to teach better. We're not going to do that. We just simply flat out refused to do that. So let's call that resistance. It was very widespread. Jump ahead 3 years later, we came back, we were filming, and there were 100% of the teachers were doing it. They were loving it. The teaching was more exciting, students found it better, the indicators started to go up, all of that. And so at the end of the day, I sat down with the deputy principal who was in charge of the initiative, and I said, I want to ask you a killer change question. When I was here 3 years ago, everybody was against it. Now, 3 years later, mostly the same teachers, not much turnover, and they're all embracing it. So, killer question. Is this practice, this participation, is it voluntary or mandatory for teachers to do it? He didn't hesitate a nanosecond. He said it's voluntary but inevitable. Think about that, voluntary but inevitable. If you have a good idea and you don't blow it, how do you blow it? Mandate it. If you want to destroy a good idea, mandate it. You can mandate things that don't require skill to implement. You can mandate seatbelts. No skill involved. With enough monitoring, you can mandate. You cannot mandate things that require new skills. And so they did things like, everybody doesn't have to do it. We want some volunteers. When you do it, you don't have to take the advice. Just think about it, all of that, and that's how they got that development. Another example, much more succinct, business. The chair of Honeywell, the CEO, he resigned, left his post about 4 years ago. And he was interviewed, they said, what's the most important thing you've learned about leadership for change in your career because you've been successful? And he said, the very most important thing I've learned is to be right at the end of the meeting, not at the beginning of the meeting. That's a metaphor, right? If you're right at the beginning of the meeting, you're only right in your own mind. If you're right at the end of the meeting, the end of the process, so to speak, you have worked with the group so that you've sorted out jointly what needs to be done and why it's that. That's the change process I'm thinking about. The collaborative cultures, this is the powerful strategy, but it's also being used superficially. We have now dug deep. When I say we, I mean Andy Hargraves and myself individually and together. And now I think I've sorted out a number of things that I want to bring to your attention. We certainly know, for starters, that collaboration itself, let's take PLCs, professional learning communities. I'm going to say 80% of PLCs are superficial. That is collaboration, but it's collaboration just to get together. And this is where we have actually on the driver's mindset, we have a new problem that in California, you can look on my website. There's a 30-page report we call Taking Stock, California's Golden Opportunity Taking Stock. We said the new problem, now that California has embraced the right drivers statewide, and they have, the new problem is is superficial implementation of the right drivers. So the people have agreed, but they're not doing it with enough depth now. So that's an interesting aside from here. When we look at school principals, as I did in this book on the school principal, I want to highlight this part of it. The reason I looked at this so closely about 5 years ago is that, for negative reasons, I guess I'll say, somehow policymakers got the message about 6 or 7 years ago, let's say, that the school principal should be an instructional leader. So they changed the job description, school principal, instructional leader. Criteria for promotion, instructional leader. The nature of the work, go visit classrooms, have walkthroughs and other kinds of ways of looking at it. Sometimes they tied it to evaluation and to even pay increases. And when I looked at this, and I said, well, the research I don't think could have said that, and I'll tell you in a moment what the actual twist in the research was, is I said, but I know it's wrong because it's not working. What it is, when in reality, if you do it, is micromanagement madness. You try to do all this, and principals that I know don't have enough time in the week to do that, and they don't do it also because if you try to do it thoroughly, it alienates principals from teachers. It doesn't increase. So I said, what is happening? What do we need to know? And I look closely, and there's only one finding that makes a difference, big, powerful difference, and it's this. The degree to which the principal participates as a learner in working with teachers to move the school forward, participates as a learner. If you look in this excerpt from the book, while working alongside them. And so this is the big difference. And we have lots of videos that show this. You can go on the YouTube channel, look up Park Manor in Ontario, or at K3 Peters in Garden Grove. Both examples of very little collaboration going on before the leader came. Leader comes with this kind of orientation, creates collaboration over a 2-year period, results start to go up. Focused collaboration with the principal, part of that. If the principal, a new principal, let's say, starts, does a number of good things, but doesn't participate as a learner, and does that for 5 years, they will, after 5 years, they'll know as much about change as they did in year 1. 5 times nothing is nothing. You actually have to do it to learn it. And those that do it really get the results. This is what the research actually said. The research on effect sizes, they used, Vivian Robinson is the author here, she used John Hattie's criterion of 0.40 is worth looking at, but not very impressive. So if you look at these 5 things, you'll see the first 3, hardly impressive at all, necessary to do, but not sufficient. And then you look at even number 3, which is interesting, revealing for us, because this is focusing on individual improvement of teaching. Individual. But now we look at this one, which is collaboration, participate as a learner. It's the only one that has a very powerful impact. The others you should do. I'm not dissing them, but I'm saying this one is the star. And that you have to be able to do this combination. Participate as a learner is an outright winner. And this is what really shows up time and again in this research. A couple of other things, then I'm going to get to end with the new work, introducing it. Andy Hargreaves and I did this book. It's on capital. We took the general definition of capital, which is something that you have and you invest and it yields things. And we applied it to the teaching profession. I already said human capital, quality of the individual, not good enough. It gets squandered. Social capital, the quality of the group. Now we're getting somewhere. Decisional capital is how people use evidence, their expertise in using data and evidence to make judgments. So if you take social capital, we said one has to start there in some way. The evidence is so clear. When the group is good, the individuals get better. And when the group is good, good individuals want to join it. And you have this kind of virtuous combination of collaborative cultures. So we said that probably is strong. The evidence is very strong in this, and every time we look at it. We had one niggling worry. We said, well, social capital, what if some teachers who were less than highly effective were interacting with other teachers who were less than highly effective to learn each other's less than highly effective methods? That would be social capital, but it wouldn't be very good social capital. So let's get more serious about it and ground it in the quality of data, the quality of decision, the quality of that. And so in our work now, we are literally doing all 3 of these and having them circulate. If you have human capital, even if it's good, and you respect that only, what you have basically, and I'll put it this way to emphasize it, if you have individual teachers who are not interacting with other teachers, even if they're good, what they represent is dead human capital. It does not circulate, and it does not get better. Or even if it's great, it doesn't get around. So our work is pretty solidly, simultaneously, synergistically doing these kinds of integration. If I ask you a rhetorical question just to ground this, the answer is in the slides, actually. If you start to think of what do you know about impacting teaching and learning? You know that individual teachers make a huge difference. So how do you use that? Well, you can use it by hiring better teachers and getting rid of those that don't work. But I like Linda Darling-Hammond's conclusion. She says, you can't fire your way to Finland, right? You can do some of that, but you're not going to get there. So if I ask the rhetorical question, teacher appraisal, flat out, it doesn't really, it's not much of a winner in terms of its impact. You need to do it with beginning teachers, but after that, it doesn't add up to much. Professional development looks like it should work, but when you look at the evidence, most of the evidence says people attend professional development, they go back, sometimes they implement it, but it wanes all the time or it doesn't get started. So it's a high cost, low yield part by itself. There's only one thing that works powerfully, and this is what I've been driving at in the last half hour, collaborative cultures. They work because cumulatively, daily, learning is the work. they really build it in. It's more natural, it's more organic, so to speak. So we've also uncovered recently a good distinction between autonomy and collaboration. The big arguments up for the last decade, teachers should have more autonomy. No, they need to collaborate more because of that difference. It turns out that this is a false dichotomy. Our colleague Michael Barber said the road to hell is paved with false dichotomies. False dichotomy, it's not that you choose between autonomy and collaboration. You do both. Autonomy is not isolation. We have a word for isolation. It's called isolation. If you're isolated, you're going to be less productive, unhealthy. If you're isolated in life, very seriously unhealthy. But if you're autonomous, which means you're your own person, and you bring your own person to the group, and you contribute to the group, and you learn from the group, you've got a two-way cycle here that's very powerful. So we call it connected autonomy, our new word, our new concept that really captures it all. It's got very specific meaning called collaborative professionalism. You can see that, you'll see that more and more. You'll see it specified in what we talk about it. Conditions for success, a certain amount of trust. But here's another sticky phrase, a new insight. Ronald Reagan, when he was dealing with Gorbachev, had a phrase, trust and verify. He said, we don't really trust Gorbachev, but we need a deal, so we'll get that, but then I'll look over his shoulder, so to speak. So we have a new one coming from our collaborative work that has to do with participation and real trust, and it's this, trust and interact. If I trust you and we interact together over time, we sort out what works and what doesn't work. It's not valuative, but it's also effective, it's accountable. Transparency has to be part of this. You have to access the work. Specificity, precision is not prescription. We never prescribe things, we hardly ever do. We might prescribe generic things like you have to interact, but not detailed things because we know those will work in that. Finally, before I try to make the switch to the deep learning part, you can think about change this way. The single word that equates with change for me is motivation. Once you understand motivation, you understand everything about change leadership. And so I go back to Dan Pink, 2009, his book, Drive. He had all kinds of data to show extrinsic motivators don't work. They can cause a blip, but they inevitably fade. So he said what does work are intrinsic motivators. Things are inside humans. And he said, he named three. We see the three in our work, but we've added a fourth. His three, sense of purpose, none other than moral purpose. Second one, mastery, none other than capacity building. You get better at something, you want to do more of it. Third one, degree of autonomy. You can't be fenced in too much or you won't be motivated. And then the final one, which is our addition, connectedness. Connectedness, I could go to the neuroscience work, is that humans connecting to others to do something worthwhile is an intrinsic human motivation. So this is a very important part about it. We've been working also with this question, interesting question, I'll only float it here. The variation in the quality of teaching, that's the question. So in a given school, there's usually a certain amount of variation in the quality of teaching across the school. We also, between schools, there's variation. Here's the kind of a pushy question. How do you reduce bad variation and get away with it? Bad variation is ineffective teaching. And I can say the short answer is by purposeful interaction. People jettison the things that don't work, they retain what doesn't work, and it begins to go better. So let me, need to skip ahead a little bit here. There's a whole set of things, you'll see them in the book about how schools get better when they collaborate, how people want to work there, how when they work there they get better by virtue of the fact of being in that culture. And so we need to begin to work more effectively. The newest work, and I'm going to end with this, is deep learning. Deep learning is learning that sticks. And in the breakout, I'll show a couple of examples, video case examples from our work. It's learning that has purpose, has passion, is immediate, is with other people, that makes a difference, that has deeper things that you discover. All of those things, we actually know quite a lot about them. And so we've been working on this the last 3 years, and we have 7 countries involved, 1,200 schools. The price of admission is you have to be in a cluster of schools, usually 20 or so schools. You have to be committed to wanting to move in this direction, not because of us, but because of your agenda. And you have to be willing to network, to contribute to the network and learn from it. Our book on deep learning is coming out in 2 weeks. It's called Deep Learning, Engage the World, Change the World. So I'm going to give you the Cook's tour of this. I started with looking at these 3 things: technology, change, and pedagogy. I said these 3 things are separate in the last 10 years. They need to be synergized, and this is how we set up the part in deep learning. We synergize them in order to be able to move effectively. And then on technology, I'm going to just want to show you a 30-second clip to prove to you I haven't gone over to the other side on technology. It'll speak for itself. So let's listen.
Emma.
Huh?
Emma.
Not anymore.
Emma.
Every day it's getting on my nerves.
Emma.
Oh, I'm
Emma.
begging you,
Emma.
please leave me alone. Oh, you
Nouveau le trèfle maxifeuille, vraiment plus large.
I hope you got both messages there, both lessons. Technology can't do everything. And the second message is judgmentalism is not a motivator, unless you want revenge. So just in the last 2 or 3 minutes I have, on the one hand, the reason we did this was the push of change, which is the fact, I'm going to say it's a fact, that present school system is no longer organized to produce what we need to. I could show you 10 graphs like this from students or teachers. This is from teachers. The percent of students that are engaged according to their own teachers. And you see it goes down, 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 not much more than a third. And so there are a lot of students that are alienated, but you could, let me even ask this interesting question. Is it possible for a student to get good grades and not be good at life? Rhetorical question. The answer is definitely yes. Life is more complicated than getting good grades. So we said the solution has to meet these criteria. You can read about it in our new book, so to speak. It's got to be engaging for teachers and students. It's got to involve deep learning. What is deep learning? Connects to passion, team-related, learning that sticks, human significance, higher order skills, and then finally, just 3 slides. One is, this is our network right now. There are a couple of hundred schools in each of 7 countries. In this country, California, Washington State, Michigan, there's a group. Illinois, we've started a group. These are people who've come into this living laboratory. And then 2 more things. The outcomes that we're looking at, the learning outcomes, are these, the 6 C's. You'll recognize 4 of them as the 21st century skills. The 2 we've added are citizenship and character. When we added those, the whole thing came alive. We have measures of these. We have rubrics that guideline. The districts and the schools that I talked about are implementing them, and they're doing better on literacy and numeracy because they're tackling these. They're certainly doing better on outcomes. One of the most exciting findings is that deep learning, as we call this, is good for all students, but it's especially good for students that are disconnected from schooling, that are really alienated from it. We call it smarten up, don't dumb down is the tweet. So we have these as the focus of the learning, and then we have surrounding that, let's say immediately as learning, our 4 things about this: improve pedagogical practices, improve partnerships between and amongst teachers, students, and families, change the learning environment, both inside the school and how they connect to the outside, and now we have digital gain, leveraging digital back into this. This is fantastic, exciting work. I'm excited by it because it has the systemness quality. It's on a large scale. It's because we're able to assess these things and stimulate excitement. And it also, there's a number of emerging discoveries that I don't have time to go into, but basically they say, given the fact that the future is crowding the present, and given the fact that all students seem to know that, 8-year-olds know it, that there's an anxiety and a concern, and students will say, don't teach me to become a citizen of 10 years from now. Teach me to become a citizen of tomorrow today. The world needs me now, and that we have to really do this. And once you unleash the change agent potential of hordes of students with teachers and building upwards, you get fantastic results from that. And one of the keys to this is leadership from the middle, we call it. The top can't get it right, the state or the federal level. The bottom, if you leave it to site-based management, is ad hoc, doesn't add up to anything. Where's the glue? The glue is in the middle when districts work to really break open this, to connect the top and the bottom, to work sideways, learn from each other. In other words, it's you in the middle that really have the initiative that can make this happen system-wide. Thank you very much.